So, picture this. It's February 23rd, 2025. The sun is setting, and you've donned your sluttiest attire for an evening at Brighton Music Hall. Again. I truly couldn't have asked for a better night. Friends to my left, right, and behind. The joy in finally having the dense network of Boston metalheads I could only dream of 6 months ago. Decent weather, too. And of course, there's no lineup that appeals to a certain breed of depressed young adult than Swallow the Sun, Harakiri for the Sky, and Ghost Bath. Snakes of Russia were there too, but stuck out pretty severely on the lineup. It's an electronic solo project, and the guy's super nice. It's hard to say who I truly went for, but in some sense, Ghost Bath had it all. An absolute classic album with 2015's Moon Lover, an anticipated release later this spring, and stuff in between then too, even. I admittedly post black metal and black gaze trash. I'll lap up any offerings from the genre. And if you're a true Nausea River fan, you figured this out already. I ranked a Death Heaven show as one of my favorite shows. Their set was amazing, very aggressive and emotionally raw in a way that you can't quite get on the album. But don't confuse that with the guys not being a little funny and self-aware between songs. They're Ghost Bath, and they write songs about killing yourself. My friend even got the Music to Kill Yourself To shirt from the table. It's funny when you've been there, at least. The funniest moment to me was the one that most people there didn't quite understand. One girl yelled out a simple question, "Where are you from?" Frontman Dennis McCullough's curt one-word answer was China. Maybe it just seemed like they were annoyed in giving a clearly wrong answer. Ghostbath are from Minot, North Dakota, if you were really curious. None of them are even of Asian descent. And to be frank, their style of post-black metal is extremely American. But, dear listeners, something else lurked beneath the surface. Something no one expects. A nothing burger, low-stakes black metal controversy. Let's start from the beginning. Ghostbath were originally a much more mysterious band, and rode on the lore they were from Chongqing, China for a few years. This wasn't even a wild tale of the pre-internet age. This is about a band formed in 2012 and outed as fakers in 2015 through Vice magazine. A time of peak discourse on Tumblr about if it was racist to wear a cheapao or not. And for 3 years, Ghostbath were passed around metal circles as a legit Chinese band. It was their location on their Bandcamp, and all their song titles on their debut album Funeral were originally written in Chinese. Ghostbath were signed to Chinese label Pest Productions, perhaps the biggest piece in keeping the charade going. Pest were not exclusively a Chinese label, but at the time had a larger focus on music in their own country. And as an aside, this is not an impossibly small niche for them to operate in. The idea of Chinese black metal never stood out to me about Ghostbath when Funeral and Moon Lover first released. Ghostbath weren't even a band when I first stepped into the abyssal depression of the band Heartless, a one-man black metal project from Taiwan, and the peak of good music and questionable vocals. Signing this band wasn't a special exception from Pest either. When interviewed by journalist Kim Kelly, the founder of the label said he fully thought that Ghostbath was Chinese at first and uncovered the truth about these silly Americans before the public did. Pissed enough to almost drop them off the label. Kelly had also, in the past, received emails in broken English to consider Ghostbath's debut album, which she speculated came from the band, not Pest Productions. A bunch of white guys from North Dakota writing in English was the closest the band got to being offensive about the whole matter, for the record. I saw them at Brighton Music Hall, so you know the story has a happy ending. They tried to pull a stupid prank, overcame a minor controversy, and now get to be on a national tour. Most fans and onlookers didn't care at all. I certainly didn't, but it makes me wonder why they even bothered. When asked, Mikula stated that only snowballed from them choosing China as a location on Bandcamp as a joke and knowing a little bit of Chinese. He compared it to the band who set their location as Hell, Michigan. Just an inside joke gone too far this time. Do I believe it? Maybe. No matter the case, I also believe the only punishment they deserve is one fan per show being annoying about it. Black metal is a subgenre of metal known for its fuzzy, fast, tremolo-picked riffs, screechy vocals, and dogshit production. It is also a genre under the specter of its worst controversies, many of them coming from the Norwegian second wave in the early 1990s. Put a bunch of nihilistic teens and young men together, and you get a storm of Satanism, arson, grisly murders and suicides, hate crimes, and worst of all, Varg Vikernes of Burzum having social media. Most of the surviving musicians involved are now boring 50-something-year-olds, though. Even the murderers reformed. Faust from Emperor killed a gay man, and I've heard multiple gay metalheads not care because he regrets what he did and supported Gal from Gorgoroth when he was outed. And hey, it helps me listen to In the Nightside Eclipse without going insane. Norway's scene has been covered and scrutinized and turned into fodder for movies ad nauseum, and now people are writing gay smut about mayhem. It's been chewed up and regurgitated through TikTok. So why look back at a small moment in history like that again? What can I even add? Black metal went on to become a breeding ground for frauds, scammers, and junkies, some of which make for good stories. Welcome to the Nausea River podcast. I'm Theo Morgan, and today we're looking at slightly lesser-known black metal controversies. It's not all fun and games, and I can't condone some of the bands in this list, but what I can say, I've witnessed a lot of metal history. And speaking of fraudulent nationalities and Kim Kelly, she wasn't always on the side of uncovering the truth. She is a great metal journalist and labor rights activist, talk about well-rounded, but she's also human just like I am. So her, me, and many other people were fooled by Janaza, Seeds of Iblis, and the rest of the alleged Arabic anti-Islam League. It was 2010 or 2011 or 2012, and yeah, I thought everybody draw Muhammad Day was the coolest thing out there. I drew a stick figure, very original, I know. It was part of the zeitgeist. I was a teenager, and I, more than many, had a keen and personal distaste for fundamentalist religious beliefs. But at the end of the day, my background is as a traditional Catholic in America. If I wanted to start a black metal band and focus entirely on anti-Islam lyrics, at best, it'd just come off as insincere. At worst, it'd join the ranks of every Nazi-adjacent meathead who hates Arab immigrants. Janaza, Seeds of Iblis, and a few other black metal bands were based out of Iraq and added to the metal archives in those years. For the two named bands, they're both the projects of a mysterious woman under the stage name Anahita. Her anonymity was understandable, though a low-quality pic of her in corpse paint got passed around as her sole ID. Between the culture of the day and the documentary Heavy Metal in Baghdad still being pretty new, people were going to talk about these bands. It wasn't completely unbelievable just with the base facts. Black metal is a notoriously low-budget genre and already rife with anonymous band members and goofy stage names. Even in a country ravaged by the US's war on terror and civil infighting, a bona fide Iraqi with a bone to pick about Islam could get the message out. You will still find music coming out of countries and zones gripped by conflict. Alas, these bands are in this episode because their origins were dubious at best, fraudulent at worst. Skepticism was slow coming until a double feature of articles. The aforementioned Kim Kelly wrote about them for The Atlantic, also conducting the second interview that Anahita had ever done, the first being for the small blog Heathen Harvest. It was conducted over Facebook Messenger, and nothing inside was particularly surprising. Anahita lost her family in a suicide bombing attack and feared death if religious authorities found her music. Janaza was a solo venture, but Seeds of Iblis wasn't, and she elaborated on her bandmates and other bands they were in. Vocalist Ipona was in False Allah, and guitarist Yusuf was in Tadnis. These were the bands that formed the Arabic Anti-Islamic League. Also, the editor for the article included the purported images of the members of Seeds of Iblis, which is where the story started to unravel. Keen-eyed viewers traced all the images back to existing black metal bands and photo shoots, mostly originating from Europe and Mexico. And before this article or even the forming of Seeds of Iblis, False Allah and Tadnis had been reported to be based out of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, respectively. What were musicians from wealthy petrol states doing in post-war Iraq anyways? This wasn't a multinational online project. Anahita talked about secret gigs in Baghdad, after all. Todnies themselves had pulled a similar stunt using a picture from the German NSBM band Morka as their own, NSBM being National Socialist Black Metal and lyrically being exactly what you'd expect. The need for anonymity was palpable, but dare I say it, they could have just edited their own damn pictures. The now-defunct Metal-Luminati compiled the evidence together in a damning article that even reached Jezebel and made The Atlantic remove the pictures from the article. They blamed Kim Kelly for not doing her job as a journalist, but again, the metal community was fooled long before she stepped in. If people were suspicious before her article, then I failed to find them. Their credibility was crushed, but only partially. No one has been uncovered for being the real source of this music. I've heard speculation about who it could be. The most convincing argument was that it was the work of an actual ex-Muslim or several living in the West. They concocted the idea of an anti-Islamic black metal band from Iraq, spearheaded by a woman no less, because otherwise The Atlantic wouldn't give a shit about you. At the end of the day, Wikipedia and the Metal Archive set the origin country of all these bands as unknown. Janaza and Seeds of Iblis continued to put out records on occasion, even into the 2020s. And despite it all, Pest Productions signed Seeds of Iblis. It would be funny if they got fooled twice. True fraudulent origins might be rare, but rumors about black metal musicians self-harming in the studio so they could get more intense, pained, real vocals are abundant. Abruptum was a Swedish black metal band who claimed to cut, beat, and pour boiling water on each other in the studio so their music would be laced with more suffering than anyone else's. Producer Dan Svana recalled that they were a bunch of rowdy teenage edgelords failing to cut themselves with a dull knife. Beyond that, I am uncomfortable saying much about self-harm rumors, especially around musicians in the depressive, suicidal black metal scene. The label says it all, doesn't it? Self-harm is a serious issue, and if I don't know who's saying stuff for shock value and who's actually struggling, it doesn't really come off as a fun, low-stakes controversy. The infamous Natram from the band Silencer almost falls into this. The story behind the band is dubious, but rumors about Natram being institutionalized don't stretch believability. He is kind of a piece of shit, for the record. Anti-Semitic lyrics and other ties to far-right ideology, just another day as a weary black metal listener. But I will not use his stints in institutions against him. That's not the infamous rumor anyways, because it truly didn't get crazier than the pig hands. Pig hands, you say? Yeah, did I stutter? There's a photo of Natram blindfolded, wrists bandaged, and severed pig trotters where his hands should be. Some metalheads and sources bought it wholesale. He cut off his own hands and stitched pig trotters on his replacements. No one suffered that much, have they? Most other onlookers, including myself, immediately knew it was bullshit. This isn't even the absurdity of an amateur doing a pig-to-human transplant, the white whale of actual transplant medicine that is yet to pan out. The story is still the same if it failed. It's just hard to cut off any part of your body. The hand is a tangled web of bones, nerves, muscles, stuff that not only hurts but is structurally very tough. Unless you're me, of course, with joints made of jello. Someone will say it's not impossible, citing edge cases and human depravity, but I concur. You can see his hands holding the trotters underneath the bandages. Natram went silent for a while, and then made dark ambient music. Perhaps it's the sort of material you could make digitally with only stumps. I still don't really believe it, though. Oddly enough, some of my favorite stories come from US black metal, my home turf. The first black metal band I got into was actually Wolves in the Throne Room, right before the Malevolent Grain EP dropped. They're pretty uncontroversial, unless you disliked the hype and their ecofeminism stance from the get-go. It's no secret that I really dig the USBM sound. I like the relative amount of polish in the production, the atmosphere, the melancholy of it all, and best of all, willingness to play with other genres to create a unique sound. Wolves in the Throne Room's lush, dark ambient sound is a good example. Besides them, there's no denying that some of the best USBM came from Nacmystium, and the brain behind it all, Blake Judd. I discovered them during the pandemic, long after their peak, but at least the back catalog was stellar. Nacmystium blended black metal with psychedelic rock so perfectly that I wondered why it was hard to find anyone who would admit to being a fan. Then you look up Blake Judd and find out exactly why. Much of this info comes from Neil Jameson, a former bandmate and friend of Judd who documented their turbulent relationship for Vice. I linked it in the description along with everything else I've cited, but I bring that up because it's a very honest, frustrating account of living with an addict. Blake Judd is a heroin addict. He is not shy about this. And I don't think Blake Judd's addiction alone makes this a worthwhile entry to gawk at. It's why I ultimately wrote a section about German musician BSOD out of this, because it was ultimately only about his very open heroin addiction and troubles with the law regarding it. But addiction makes you into the worst version of yourself, and the worst version of Blake Judd wore down his colleagues in music and scammed Knockmystium fans out of cold, hard cash. There isn't much fame to be found in black metal, but despite his issues, Judd was as close to being on top of the world as one could get in the genre. Knockmystium was enjoying a record deal with Century Media, their album Silencing Machine breaking through the Billboard charts, and a metric that was way more important a decade ago, 33,000 Facebook followers. It was enough to make him the big name of the black metal supergroup Twilight, a band that literally had Thurston Moore in it. Yeah, Sonic Youth's Thurston Moore. He's a big metalhead, just roll with this. Anyways, it's almost enough fame to make the story tragic. Neil Jameson, who was also part of Twilight and well acquainted with Judd through Knockmystium and his own band Krieg, had many personal frustrations with his friend. They had been through a lot. Neil was even in Blake's wedding party, but Blake Judd was not a good friend. He went behind Jameson's back and sold the rights to the first 2 Krieg albums and pocketed all the money. He set up and canceled a whole Knockmystium and Krieg tour and left Neil with the expenses. Neil would often end up enabling his friend just for a moment of peace, driving him to ATMs and to dealers all around Chicago. He bought Blake's vinyl collection hoping for more peace. He lived in Judd's filthy, needle-strewn apartment just to try and get his ass in the studio when the Twilight record finished. Blake Judd was not a good bandmate either. He struggled to finish 3 songs for the Twilight record, and Neil still had to record some vocals in his place. He stole demos from bandmate Jeff Whitehead of Leviathan fame and sold them to Century Media as Twilight bonus tracks. Judd pocketed almost all the money given to Twilight to make a record. Only the studio and Thurston Moore received their shares. For a man in a downward spiral, he still had the good sense to tread lightly with an actual celebrity. It would be juicy band drama on its own, but the public downfall of Blake Judd came at the expense of his own fans. Whatever money Knockmystium was legitimately bringing in wasn't enough. When Judd was finally arrested and jailed for petty theft, not of fans but of one of his friends, Neil Jameson took control of his friend's social media and professional affairs and figured out the extent of the damage. It started with Knockmystium's Facebook page moderators expecting pay that never came, and then he found the countless sales. Blake had listed rare vinyl he owned for sale to the tune of hundreds per record that Jameson knew he did not have. Remember, he bought Blake Judd's entire vinyl collection, and the listings were made after that. Anyone who sent him money and didn't receive their goods would get blocked and banned, and there was no other recourse. And as a blow to Knockmystium's reputation, he took pre-orders for their 2014 album and never fulfilled them. Some of them were expensive album and merch bundles, too. That move was the final straw for Century Media, which finally dropped him like a hot potato. If the ending was crueler for Blake Judd, this would be a more difficult passage to write. In the decade or so since then, he's sobered up and reformed Knockmystium, only to release an anti-cancel culture song last year. Like, whatever your stance is on that, I can't say that Blake Judd is hated for being a white man. Knockmystium's reputation is tarnished, but they'll always live on the algorithm of annoying USBM fans like myself. Should you listen to them? This is probably a time to avoid physical media, if anything. Otherwise, go for it. I'm Theo Morgan, and have a good night.